For the 2 decades or so that I've worked for him, I've just been trying to keep up. From Baghdad to Bagram, from Paris to Pretoria, to so many points in between. It's been one of the great privileges and pleasures of my life to watch President Biden in action across the globe. And I know from seeing him in action that he believes profoundly in leading with diplomacy, mobilizing our friends and allies to work together in common cause. As important, he welcomes new ideas, dissenting views, rigorous debate. He wants to ensure that our foreign policy stays innovative and creative, so it doesn't just respond to global events, it actually helps to shape them. Those are the instructions that I have from him. That is what we are going to try to do here at the State Department. And President Biden and Vice President Harris have made it clear that in everything we do, the first question we have to ask ourselves is this: how is it going to benefit our fellow Americans? How will this policy, how will this initiative, how will this outreach answer their needs, their values? How will it make their lives just a little bit better? That's the first question we have to ask. And we're going to hold ourselves to that standard every step of the way. We're lucky to have this president and this vice president at the helm during such a pivotal time for our nation and for the world. And so it's very much my honor today to introduce to you the President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for welcoming the Vice President and me back to the State Department. It's true the Secretary and I have worked together a long time. And I know that he has the background and the capacity needed to, quite frankly, lead the State Department at a critical moment. This has been a difficult few years. I've been hanging around as the Foreign Relations Committee and as chairman and then as vice president and now as president for a long time dealing with state. Those of you who work here, including the new class of diplomats that are on the screen behind me, you're among the brightest, most involved, best educated group of people America has to offer. And but I come today to talk to everyone at Maine State, watching remotely, and those who will not be able to see this but will hear about it. You know, an incredible group of diplomats that I've had a chance to work with, and what we never talk about is you not only have great intellectual capacity, you have great personal courage. I've been with some of you when we've been shot at. I've been with some of you when we've been in places that you would not have any idea you'd want to be when you were going to school foreign policy and foreign service. They never told you that was going to happen. But you're an incredible group of individuals. And I've said many times over the years, those of you who are stationed overseas and have been stationed overseas, you're America's face. You're what people see in the country you are. They look at you. You are the face of America. And it matters. It matters a great deal how you comport yourself and how you deal with the folks that you're dealing with in that particular country. I find it, many of you among the most incredible, and by the way, I think what we don't do enough, we don't thank your families. We don't thank your families for the sacrifices they make. They make real sacrifices. I don't know how many times I have moved, and I may again move to see to it that your spouses, they give up their careers many times to follow you. Many times their careers are as consequential or more consequential than yours, but they do it for the country. And they're to be thanked. But the main message that I want to communicate to you all is that whether you're part of the newest class of Foreign Service officers, you've worked for decades in the civil service or foreign service, or you're locally employed staff, your vital and success and strength of our nation depends in no small part on you. Later today, I'm going to go up on the 8th floor and send a clear message to the world. America is back. America is back. Diplomacy is back. You are the center of all that I intend to do. You are the heart of it. We're going to rebuild our alliances. We're going to re-engage the world and take on the enormous challenge we face, dealing with the pandemic, dealing with global warming, and again, standing up for democracy and human rights around the world. Again, as I said, you're the face of America abroad. And in our administration, you're going to be trusted and you're going to be empowered. Trusted and empowered to do your job. But I ask each of you to abide by a few core tenets. Integrity in all you do. We say it again, integrity in all you do. Transparency and accountability to rebuild trust in America around the world. Working in the service of the American people, not self-interest, and promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility across the board, because our diplomats at all levels should reflect the full diversity of this great country. I know how much we ask of you and your families, and I mean that. I do know. It's been a long time I've been dealing with this building and all of your predecessors. The sacrifices you make are real and not recognized much by the country as a whole. They don't know all that you do. I also know that you've never let us down. I believe in you. I believe in you. We need you badly. I trust you. And I'm going to have your back, that I promise you. Just like you're going to have the backs of the American people. What I always point out to people, in the years when I was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, I'd make sure that my Foreign Relations Committee staff came to my home state and worked on constituent services, which many of them thought was sort of beneath them. I'm a foreign policy specialist. But it's all about who you work for, who I work for, who we work for. And the foreign policy is about promoting the interest of the people of the United States within a rubric and a set of principles that treat everyone with decency. So I promise you I'm going to have your back. I promise you. And I expect you to have the back of the American people. Now I've got a lot of work to do, a lot of catching up to do, a lot of rebuilding to do. And I can't think of any group of people better capable of doing it, more ready than all of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I look forward to working with you. I look forward to seeing you. And I look forward to coming back when this auditorium is filled and no one has to wipe down the podium. So again, folks, thank you. You are the heart and soul of who we are as a country, and the rest of the world is looking to you to help them understand us, and so we can help them as well. So thank you all very much, and may God bless you, and may God keep you all safe when you're abroad. Thank you. Thanks again.
And you've been listening to President Biden and Vice President Harris speak to State Department staff. The president told them, you are the face of America abroad, and in this administration, you're going to be trusted and empowered to do your jobs. He said, you are vital to the strength and success of our country. America is back. He said, diplomacy is back. I promise you, I'm going to have your backs just as you have the backs of the American people. That was his message to State Department staff. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with a lot more news, so stay with us. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
I'd spend all my time on the internet, and it always seemed to take me deeper.
Even innocuous video games and social media have become rabbit holes to radicalization.
My son was scrolling Instagram, and I saw Hitler. He liked it, he passed it.
They post a picture of this black guy getting lynched. Right under it, it says, equality is a myth. There's mass shootings going on. People are dying every day from gun violence. I don't give a shit.
Extremism can be more appealing to young people when you make it kind of fun. That's what we saw the alt-right do.
I went from being a libertarian to being a conservative, and then at the very end, drifting into white nationalism.
I don't know that parents realize that kind of thing's happening.
COVID-19 is impacting every American in one way or another. But if you're Asian American, you may also be getting the blame.
Overt, in-your-face racism.
I'm Elaine Quijano. Join me as CBS News helps make sense of the unique impact of the pandemic on our country's Asian American communities and why they are making their voices heard in the presidential election.
We count. Our votes matter.
Asian Americans battling bias. Watch free with the CBS News app.
They're trying to steal the election from us.
Shutting down churches, businesses with no real scientific evidence.
There's a big obsession among the right wing that people are out there trying to get your children. We're literally rescuing our world from an evil satanic cabal. A conspiracy theory is implicitly trying to address suffering and pain that people are feeling.
Far-right QAnon has spread like wildfire, gaining traction on social media platforms across the country.
So they've gamed the algorithm?
They have gamed social media as a whole.
I stand with Q and the team. Together, we can save our republic.
Save our children!
I'm not going in.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. Today, the House will vote on whether or not to remove a freshman Republican Congresswoman from her committee assignments. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene faces criticism for embracing conspiracy theories and claiming to support violence against Democrats before she was a member of Congress. House Democrats are moving forward with the vote after Republican leaders chose not to remove her from posts on the Budget and Education committees. On the House floor earlier today, Congresswoman Greene said those actions were all in the past and do not represent her now.
I decided to run for Congress because I wanted to help our country. I want Americans to have our American dream. I want to protect our freedoms. This is what I ran for Congress on. I never once said during my entire campaign, QAnon. I never once said any of the things that I am being accused of today during my campaign. I never said any of these things since I have been elected for Congress. These were words of the past, and these things do not represent me. They do not represent my district, and they do not represent my values.
Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney also survived an effort by her own party to remove her from GOP leadership yesterday. Members supported her 145 to 61 after she voted to impeach former President Trump. CBS News congressional correspondent Chris Van Cleve reports from Capitol Hill.
In the end, Republicans made no changes.
The number one thing that happened at the conference was unity.
This despite members spending hours debating whether to strip Wyoming's Liz Cheney of her leadership post over her impeachment vote and Georgia's Marjorie Taylor Greene of her committee positions. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said he unequivocally condemned Greene's anti-Semitic, violent, and conspiracy-filled comments, but would not remove her from the Education or Budget Committee.
She said she was wrong. She has reached out in other ways and forms, and nothing that she said has been based upon since she's been a member of Congress.
But Greene has not publicly apologized, tweeting Wednesday, no one was owed an apology and she would never back down. After McCarthy declined to act, Democrats announced they would, scheduling a floor vote Thursday against Greene. It's an unprecedented action. Usually party leaders decide to remove one of their own. In 2019, GOP leadership removed Iowa Republican Steve King from his committees after he questioned when the term white supremacist became offensive. King lost in a primary last year. The most recent member to be expelled from Congress was Ohio Democrat James Traficant in 2002. He was convicted of 10 felony counts, including bribery, racketeering, and fraud. But that vote was about criminal action. Today's vote is about politics and the continued influence of former President Donald Trump. Former Senator Marco Rubio campaign manager Terry Sullivan.
At the end of the day, this vote is going to be, we're going to see where everybody stands on it. They're going to be forced to vote up or down, Republican and Democrat. The party is in the desert. It needs to find itself, and it needs to refine its principles.
All right. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene's this vote on Marjorie Taylor Greene is expected later today. She, of course, has been using this opportunity to raise her profile and fundraise. In fact, yesterday raised $175,000 in just one day. Tanya.
Chris, thanks for joining us. So, as we mentioned, the House is voting to remove Congresswoman Greene from committee assignments today. What will happen if the vote passes? How does that play out?
Well, the vote is kind of unprecedented. It is not, as we said in the story, the way this normally works, that where the party, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, that party would make the decision to remove somebody from a committee. So it is unprecedented when the majority party is moving to remove somebody from the minority party from committees. But if it passes, they'll do just that. They will strip Marjorie Taylor Greene of her committees. And of course, if she's not on a committee, she's not in a position to influence legislation. She won't participate in hearings, which is one of the ways that members of Congress steer legislation, but also can sort of create a viral moment of them at work. And it also means that her district then is sort of shut out of that representation on those committees. But how it will work, there's debate going on right now. There will be a vote. If you're the Democrats, you're looking to tie Republicans to this sort of conspiracy theory, QAnon, all of that. You want an up and down vote so that you can use that against Republicans, as frankly the campaign arm of the Democratic Party is already doing in some attack ads that have started to air.
And Chris, also, as we mentioned earlier, last night, Congresswoman Liz Cheney survived that vote to stay on as the GOP conference chairwoman after her vote to impeach former President Trump. What does this reckoning of sorts say about the state of the Republican Party right now? And where does the party go from here?
Well, I think if you listen to Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, he says what came out of that is unity. There were still 61 members of that caucus that voted to strip the number 3 Republican leader in the House of her position. That doesn't sound like unity necessarily. So there are still divides within the Republican Party. McCarthy appears to be taking the approach of we're going to keep it a big tent, even if it gets a little messy inside. And that's probably a good strategy if you're trying to move this caucus forward. But clearly there are divisions. You also see about 145 members who voted with Liz Cheney, which would seem to indicate that perhaps when they don't have to put their names on it, that the size of the party that is interested in moving away from the rhetoric of former President Donald Trump is larger than perhaps we first thought. But clearly, you've got some division here. The challenge for Leader McCarthy is to pivot from sort of the distractions, the internal fighting, the controversy around Representative Green, and focus his caucus on being an alternative voice to the Biden-Harris agenda and towards trying to win back the majority in the House in 2022. You know, when you think about it, election season for those races coming up here in just really a matter of months.
All right. Well, Chris Van Cleve on Capitol Hill, thank you.
Thanks.
Some positive news in the fight against the coronavirus. The pace of COVID vaccinations in the United States is steadily rising. The drug makers have distributed nearly 56 million doses across the United States. Healthcare workers administered more than half of those shots. But as CBS News national correspondent David Begnaud found out, the vaccine rollout is based on population size, leaving several rural areas behind.
Y'all wear your masks and stay safe, okay?
The heart of Appalachia beats with the help of nurse practitioner Teresa Tyson.
How long did you work in the mines?
32 years.
32 years.
She runs the Health Wagon, the mobile medical clinic providing crucial health care to low-income and underserved people here in southwestern Virginia.
They don't have reliable transportation. They don't have the money for fuel to go to a clinic.
For 28 years, Nurse Teresa has navigated these rural roads of Appalachia to service those who otherwise may not get any medical care. What they need now, she says, is the vaccine. The Health Wagon services 2 health districts in the state. Those districts account for about 2% of Virginia's population. And this week, they received about 2,100 doses out of the approximately 120,000 vaccines allocated to the state. Now, that's just under 2%.
How about the COVID vaccine? We are trying to get that.
Health Wagon, which has more than 5,600 active patients, has not gotten a single dose. Instead, they've gone to mostly local hospitals, local health departments, and long-term care facilities.
I'm just desperate to get the vaccine for my people.
We went to Dr. Danny Avula, the state's vaccine coordinator. He told CBS News there is not enough doses coming from the federal government to distribute to everyone who wants it.
A month or 2 months from now, as new vaccines come on the scene, we'll be able to start feeding all of these channels of providers and pharmacies who can get out the vaccine at large scale.
As of today, Virginia is deciding who gets vaccines based on population. But Nurse Teresa says that's not fair. Appalachia is more rural, but the need is enormous.
Vulnerable populations need to be a priority in receiving this vaccine. They have chronic health conditions. They actually live 10 years less than our counterparts on the eastern shore of Virginia.
And they're poorer here. Health Wagon says the poverty rate of the area it services is 54% higher than the rest of Virginia.
Is there something you can do to get vaccines here for them quick?
Absolutely. It's called more doses.
He is Virginia's governor, Ralph Northam, who himself is a doctor.
Right now, David, we're getting about 120,000 doses a week. We need about 350,000.
Most of what I heard is Teresa's doing great work, but she just needs to be patient. What do you say?
Oh my gosh, I can't be patient. I have to be a voice for the people that do not have a voice here. How can you be patient in a pandemic when people are dying?
Here's the bottom line. Virginia needs more doses from the federal government, but so does every other state. In the meantime, what are they going to do to help Health Wagon? Full disclosure, when the governor heard CBS News was coming here, he asked to be a part of the story. And I thought he was going to come on and say, I'm sending doses there. He didn't. But Nurse Teresa remains optimistic. She's got a good relationship with the governor, and she thinks that now that he's on notice, so to speak, he's going to do something to help him. David Begnaud, CBS News, here in Appalachia, in the westernmost part of Virginia.
Joining us now is Dr. Julie Morita. She is the Executive Vice President of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and a former member of the Biden administration Transition Advisory Board. Dr. Morita, welcome. Great to have you with us. So you spoke before a congressional hearing yesterday about vaccine inequity. You also co-authored an article in USA Today that really drove home the point that while the pandemic is affecting everyone, it is not affecting everyone in the same way. With that said, where are states going wrong with vaccine distribution? And what needs to be done to ensure that those who are the most vulnerable get vaccinated at the front of the line?
Hi, Tanya. Thanks for having me again. I think the key thing to keep in mind here is that data serve as the foundation for how we build the programs. The data told us over the past year with the pandemic, that there are certain groups that are more seriously affected. So communities of color actually have higher rates of disease, hospitalization, death. There's also rural communities that are impoverished communities that are actually at higher risk as well. So the data told us who's at risk. And now the key thing is really having information regarding where these people are they getting the vaccines or not? And then directing the resources and then modifying programs to make sure that people can actually get the vaccines, that those who are at highest risk for serious disease, death, or hospitalization are actually able to get the vaccine. So critical to that is making sure the vaccines are located in the right places, either by a mobile van or by fixed site locations, but also making sure that the systems for making appointments and for registering are simple enough that everyone has an opportunity to get them fairly.
And Dr. Morita, on Monday, the CDC announced that it has race and ethnicity data for only half of the administered vaccines. How will this data gap sort of impact vaccinating underserved populations, especially Black and Latino communities?
I think the report from the CDC actually demonstrated the data that they have are really incomplete. And in order to really understand who's receiving the vaccines and how effective the programs are, we really have to have much more complete information. So the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation issued some guiding principles for health equity, for response and also for recovering. And among them were really having granular data that included race, ethnicity, geography, so that we can actually make sure that the information that we have really can help us to fix our programs and make them stronger and allow them to reach the people who are at greatest need.
So moving beyond just the vaccinations, we see now that many places are beginning to ease some of their COVID restrictions, even though Dr. Antony Fauci has said that at least 70% of the U.S. population needs to be vaccinated before we can return to normal. What do we need to do to get there? And how can we try to manage COVID if some communities are easing restrictions and obviously not all?
So I think we know that there are certain things that actually work effectively to prevent infections in addition to the vaccines. Vaccines are a tool, but we have other tools that we can use. And those things including wearing masks, social distancing, avoiding crowds, washing hands, all those things are really critical. And so doing those measures while we're waiting to get vaccinated, because we know the vaccine supply is insufficient to vaccinate everyone, is really, really important. When community levels of disease transmission are lower, it's okay to open up restaurants. It's actually okay to open up schools, but they have to be done in safe ways so that there's limits in terms of the number of people that are indoor dining, that there's appropriate ventilation, that people are wearing masks when they should be wearing masks, and that those kinds of provisions have to be in place so that if we think about reopening some of the schools, some of the restaurants, that those kinds of measures are in place and can be done safely.
Now, we are seeing more variants popping up in the U.S., but as we reported yesterday, the nation is only sequencing right now fewer than 1% of new COVID samples. And when you compare that to the U.K., which samples around 10% of tests, that seems woefully inadequate. So why aren't we sampling more tests, and how would more sequencing help us in the fight against the virus?
I think it's important to recognize that with this pandemic response, this is the biggest public health emergency that we've had in our lifetimes. And in order for us to have the strongest, best response, we really need sufficient resources. There were billions of dollars that were invested in the development of the new vaccines. And as a result, we have vaccines available at record speed. But what also needs to be supported is the laboratories to do this kind of disease testing, variant testing and identification, and also surveillance. In addition to that, we need additional resources to make sure that those at the front lines, like the mobile unit driver that you were describing, have the resources they need to actually deliver the vaccines to the communities throughout the nation, especially those who are at highest risk and more vulnerable. So really, these additional resources are necessary to make sure that we can actually stand up appropriate response, and that applies to the variant testing as well.
All right. Well, Dr. Julie Morita, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
The number of Americans filing for unemployment is at its lowest level since late November. 779,000 Americans filed for first-time unemployment benefits, a decrease of 33,000 claims from the previous week. But the numbers remain elevated. The January unemployment numbers will be out tomorrow. With the pandemic still putting pressure on the job market, economists expect the job numbers to remain stagnant. The Pentagon has ordered a military-wide stand down over the next 60 days to address extremism in the U.S. military. According to military service records and court documents reviewed by CBS News, federal authorities have charged at least 16 veterans for their alleged involvement in the attack on the Capitol. 2 others are in the Army Reserve. During the 60-day stand down, leadership will communicate directly with their men and women about the department's behavior expectations and discuss the presence of extremist ideology in the ranks. Pentagon officials say they are hoping to gain further insight into the scope of the problem. During his recent confirmation hearing, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin acknowledged extremist elements within the military, including white supremacy. He testified the Pentagon's job is to keep America safe from our enemies, which it cannot do if some of those enemies lie within our own ranks. Meanwhile, the Navy has released nearly 60 recommendations to address sexism, racism, and bias, and a lack of diversity in its senior leadership. Navy officials will also look at how bias or favoritism impact promotion. The House impeachment managers have requested former President Trump testify under oath in his Senate trial. The former president is facing 1 count of inciting insurrection for the attack on the Capitol. Mr. Trump's lawyers have called the impeachment process unconstitutional because he is no longer in office. But the impeachment managers, led by Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin, says there is precedent to try the former commander-in-chief. They requested to hear Mr. Trump's account of his actions prior to assault. The trial is scheduled to begin next Tuesday. The conflict no one was talking about until now. Still to come, farmers in India take on the government over new regulations. We look at how social media is bringing new attention to protests that have been ongoing for months. And strict rules for the Summer Games. We look at the regulations Japanese officials plan to enforce on athletes and fans to keep the Olympics COVID-free. You're streaming CBSN.
COVID has taken the lives of tens of thousands of Americans. Rural areas like this here on Navajo Nation are especially hit hard.
15 to 30% of our Navajo citizens don't have running water.
In any indigenous reservation, there is a shortage of physicians.
Native Americans are amongst the most vulnerable and hardest hit by COVID.
Yeah, the more we lose our elders to COVID-19, the more we lose our language and our way of life.
We need to bring awareness to the attention of Washington, D.C. and United States citizens that there is a need to focus on the first citizens of this country.
CBSN Los Angeles. Get local news, breaking news, anytime, anywhere.
It's easy to find us, and it's free.
Download the CBS News app on your favorite devices. CBSN Los Angeles, streaming 24/7. CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on kdka.com and on all your favorite devices.
In 60 years, we went from about 100,000 factory workers to probably about 7,000.
Off in the distance, you can see some factories that are still humming, but most of them are just kind of abandoned.
The restaurant industry right now is one of the largest and fastest growing industries in America. And yet it continues to be the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States.
Barely anybody's making enough to live.
You were donating plasma to get by.
It's literally a slave wage.
I don't remember growing up like this. My mom didn't have to go to food banks. It's pretty sad.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Welcome back to CBSN. The threat of the coronavirus is hanging over Super Bowl 55 as the Kansas City Chiefs and Tampa Bay Buccaneers get set for the big game. The Chiefs have placed 2 players on the COVID-19 reserve list due to close contact with a barber who was infected. Wide receiver Demarcus Robinson and center Daniel Kilgore have both tested negative so far and still have a chance of playing on Sunday. However, neither player can practice until the weekend. ESPN reports as many as 20 Chiefs players and staffers, including star quarterback Patrick Mahomes, had been scheduled to get a haircut with that barber prior to his test results coming in. Several NFL teams had to cancel or postpone games in the 2020 season due to outbreaks. However, NFL Players Association President DeMaurice Smith says he does not see any scenario in which the union would agree to move the Super Bowl for COVID-19 reasons. That could lead to an advantage for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers if this outbreak on the Chiefs worsens. Troy Vincent is the Executive Vice President of Football Operations for the National Football League. He played 14 years in the league, earning 5 Pro Bowl berths and winning the 2002 Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year Award. And he joins me now from Tampa, Florida, site of Super Bowl 55. Troy, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the game. These 4 days can't come fast enough.
You and a lot of Americans. What is the league doing to keep players and coaches safe from COVID-19 this week so both teams can be as close to full capacity as possible on Sunday?
Well, the one thing that changed from previous years is the visiting team. Well, you only have one visiting team. We've never had a home team host the Super Bowl in their home city, but the Chiefs are actually practicing and staying at home until Saturday. And the protocols that we've seen throughout the duration of the season has worked. Virtual meetings, only come to the facility and practice on the field, go back to virtual meetings, proper spacing, proper PPEs inside the building. Those protocols has allowed us to complete 256 regular season games in 17 weeks. And now we're here at the biggest stage. So we're hoping that the players, coaches all remain vigilant these next 4 days so that we can kick that ball off Sunday night.
It's an amazing feat. What have been the biggest challenges in coordinating this year's Super Bowl, a Super Bowl literally unlike any other?
Well, the uncertainty. You don't have people. We're limited staff here. Now, one thing that has helped is that you don't have teams in. You don't have the crowds. Field preparation has gone over extremely well. The weather has been, at least to date, oh, thank you, Lord. It has been phenomenal, even though it's been a little brisky. But the preparation has been normal. We're excited about where we are. The COVID protocols, I must say the mayor, city officials have just been outstanding. We have been more vigilant around safety protocols for the general public than ever before. Our number one priority is not only to get the game kicked off, but make sure that the fans and the people that are watching, whatever venue are, that you're practicing good social distancing, and you got to keep wearing your PPEs.
Absolutely. I want to pivot a little bit, Troy, and talk about diversity in the NFL. Last May, you called the hiring system broken. Only one black coach, David Culley, now of the Texans, was hired to lead a team. But there are a lot of high-profile candidates this year who didn't get head coaching gigs. The Chiefs' Eric Bieniemy, the Bills' Leslie Frazier, whom you personally vouched for, and the Buccaneers' Todd Bowles and Byron Leftwich. This week, Bucs head coach Bruce Arians expressed his frustration that Leftwich didn't even get an interview. Let's listen to that.
I was a little really upset that Byron didn't get one because I think he's everything that everybody's supposedly looking for. You know, a quarterback, a play caller, and he's African American. So, I mean, I don't know what else you're looking for. He's a great leader. I think that, I'm throwing Keith Armstrong in the mix too. I think all those guys should be getting interviews for head coaching jobs, and hopefully next year.
The league office has gone out of its way to make incentives for teams to make diverse hires, but it doesn't seem to be working out all that often. What more can the NFL do to convince owners to consider high-profile black candidates?
Well, I would start with not happy with the results that we've seen this particular hiring cycle for head coaches. But the overall totality of our diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, we saw there was clear progress. We look at 3 new general managers that have been hired. Anthony Lynn, offensive coordinator, Raheem Morris, defensive coordinator. We have some special team coordinator roles. We have our first team president. We still have a lot of work to do. And I must, to generalize the statement, we've heard many say that the owners aren't committed. Well, the principal owners have been driving. There's others that we got to pull along and bring along with us, but we're more committed. I'm very optimistic personally, working with the commissioner and Chairman Rooney around our practices, and Deja Smith, our chief people's officer. Our 7-point mobility plan that we put in place a year ago, we'll have an opportunity as this hiring cycle concludes here in the next week or so to assess, to analyze, and to listen of the why. Why wasn't Eric Bieniemy? And hear from those who interviewed Coach Bieniemy, why wasn't? Those clubs that interviewed Leslie Frazier, what happened? And also ask those prospects, what did they take away from that interview experience? But we got some work to do on the head coaching side. We've seen some increases on our gender side. So the totality of our efforts, there was clear progress that demonstrates we got better, but we got a lot of work to do.
So I wonder what you think about, the views of Doug Williams, the first black quarterback to play in a Super Bowl. He spoke with USA Today about this very topic, and he said both you and Commissioner Goodell have your hands tied, saying, quote, "This is on the owners. There are some that apparently still have a difficult time getting past the skin color of a candidate. They are 32 entities, and not all of them have open minds." So what's your reaction to his view?
Doug's a personal friend, mentor. I remain optimistic and hopeful. Why? Because I have an opportunity to work with the principal owners on a daily basis. Our fight is internal, external, and within the family. So each of us play a role. Together we get it done. We got to continue to educate. We got to continue to identify and network with the talent. We got work to do, but we remain optimistic just based off of some of the progress that was made in the plan that was put together a year ago. But to Doug, Shaq Harris, Jimmy Ray, there are many. Doug is speaking through pain and experience, and we got work to do, but we're going to get it done together.
Right. And of course, speaking of that work, the NFL's response to the surge in the Black Lives Matter last summer did include an apology to Colin Kaepernick for how he was treated during his peaceful protests, against systemic racism. But a lot of people are still unhappy with how things turned out for Kaepernick. He still does not have a job in football all these years later. He was certainly a talented player. Can the NFL fully atone for its mistakes with Kaepernick? Are there ways to bring him back in, whether, an on-the-field job or working with the league to address these issues? I mean, shouldn't he be brought back into the fold somehow?
Happy to work with him. I personally have reached out to him throughout the years to make sure that he's included on our efforts. Colin led the efforts. I guess that was back in 2 or 3 years ago. I don't want 16 or 17, but Colin, Eric Reed, Anquan Bolden, many of these young athletes during that time, they were out front. And their message, their efforts got distorted. It was robbed. It was politically charged. And we're at a different place today. But we commend Colin, Anquan, Malcolm Jenkins. There were so many, Kenny Stills, Eric Reed. These individuals were stellar in their efforts. Ongoing efforts. We support the players. We continue to. As a former player myself, the peer-to-peer relationship is critical. Again, I've reached out to Colin and others to make sure that we have an inclusive process on what our efforts should be and how we go about getting it done together.
All right, Troy, finally, your predictions on Sunday's game?
No predictions. I just want a kickoff. I want a good game. I'm looking forward to the Confederate coming down so that I can pack up my bags and say, thank you, and thank you. No predictions.
Very diplomatic answer. All right. Well, Troy, Vincent, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for having me. You all take care and enjoy Super Bowl 55.
And you can watch Super Bowl 55 live this Sunday on CBS. You can also stream it on CBS All Access, CBSSports.com, and the CBS Sports app. We're going to take a short break, but this is a good time to remind you you can stay up to date by downloading our CBS News app. Stay with us. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
Boom.
And reach for the stars.
There we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more. Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
A Quinnipiac poll shows widespread support for President Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus relief proposal. The survey reveals 68% of Americans support the bill as presented by the president, with just 24% in opposition. 78% agree with the president's call for $1,400 stimulus checks. A majority is also in favor of raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Mr. Biden met with members of both parties this week. He has signaled a willingness for some compromise, but is telling Democrats it's better to go too big than too small. Kirsten Gillibrand is the junior senator from New York. She's a Democrat sitting on the Senate Agriculture, Armed Services, and Intelligence Committees, and she joins me now from Washington. Senator Gillibrand, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
So given the vast public support for Mr. Biden's stimulus proposal, should Democrats move forward without worrying about input from Republican lawmakers, or do you see areas where there is still room to come together?
So there's a lot that's bipartisan in the bill already. The stimulus checks are bipartisan. The money for vaccinations and for testing and contact tracing is bipartisan, as well as additional money for food stamps and nutrition. So those are the areas of agreement. The areas where we don't have Republican support are vital, though. We need resources for our frontline first responders, for our teachers and our educators, for all the emergency workers that cities and states pay for. They aren't covered in the Republican proposal, and we need resources for them. So I do believe, because this is so widely supported by all Americans from both parties, that we should move forward as soon as possible. There's urgent need in my state of New York, and I'm sure it's true in all states. So we should move forward quickly to get those resources into our states now.
So New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is urging Congress to provide your state with $15 billion in federal funding, which he says is New York State's, quote, fair share. He's preparing to take legal action if the federal government does not supply those funds, as he laid out last month in the state's budget proposal. Let's play some of that.
If Washington doesn't provide the New York State with our fair share of funding, we're going to pursue litigation. Because I cannot in good faith represent the people of this state and know that they are being harmed and know that they're being treated unfairly, and not do everything within my power to try to do what is right by New York.
And so, Senator, we know Republicans did not include any money for states and cities in that recent counter proposal to the White House's stimulus bill. In your view, is the $350 billion in state and local aid that's in the president's bill non-negotiable? Or is it a piece that could be put aside for now in the interests of having some more bipartisan movement?
I think it is non-negotiable at this point. We've been asking for money for our states and our cities and our counties for the last 9 months, and the Republicans refuse to support it. So yes, I think at this point it is non-negotiable. We have to have that as part of this package. And other things like paid leave. We need money for food stamps and pandemic EBT to give resources for basic food on people's dinner tables at night. We need resources for housing. We need resources for first responders and healthcare workers. And we need money for more vaccines. We need to, I think, train a health force so that we can have more workers who are putting shots in arms for states trained by the CDC. That's supported by President Biden as well. So there's a lot that needs to be in this, and I don't think it is a time for half measures. I think it's a time for robust response to grave need.
And you mentioned paid family leave and the work you're doing on that. I want to get to that in just a moment. But first, I want to ask about the federal $15 minimum wage. In your view, is that also a non-negotiable part of the bill? Because while it is popular and certainly has its merits, it isn't necessarily directly related to coronavirus relief. Could that then become a separate piece of legislation?
It could be separate. It's included, I think, in the first bill because it's a reconciliation bill. So it's one where you do things that are budgetary in nature, and it would be appropriate to go in that bill. I support a $15 minimum wage. Our state has led on that. But if you can't guarantee a worker $15 for an hour, then you're saying to the worker, I want you to work for full time, but I want you to be in poverty. It's outrageous. We should have a living wage in this country. And there's no time like the present to do what's right. And so I support including it.
And you've also been pushing for and working hard for paid family leave for a while now. Why do you think this is an important aspect for COVID recovery? And is this something that needs bipartisan agreement to move forward on?
So right now in the COVID relief bill, it's just the pandemic paid leave. So it's just tax credits for employers to offer paid leave now so that a person doesn't have to be fired. If they have to stay home because their child's school isn't open, or because they have COVID, or a family member has COVID and they need to take care of that family member, that is necessary. But if we had had paid leave as a national benefit before this pandemic, it would have been so much easier to help people. We could have funded paid leave fully. People wouldn't have lost their jobs. They would have been able to stay home when they needed to. And there would have been the infrastructure that's necessary to keep the economy going. We are the only industrialized country in the entire world that doesn't have access to national paid leave. So it's needed, and it would help us protect against the next pandemic. So I'm hopeful that while we probably will only include a smaller version of paid leave, a pandemic version of paid leave, I'm hoping that one of the first bills we can actually pass into law is a national paid leave bill.
And I know that's something you've been working on for a while, Senator. I want to talk a little bit about the reconciliation process, because obviously Republicans have used it as recently as 2017 when they passed tax cuts with a simple majority. They used it unsuccessfully when they tried to enact an Affordable Care Act repeal. So Democrats are not breaking with precedent in these efforts. But even so, do you fear long-term consequences of having Congress operate in this fashion where the majority party has virtually unchecked power?
You know, the Republicans used reconciliation for a close to $1.9 trillion tax cut. So I would rather be able to use it now for the same amount of money to help people, to go straight into the hands of people who are suffering and need support. Those tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and the largest businesses were not money well spent. It should have been spent on the middle class. Middle class families need tax cuts, not the wealthy. And now we have to spend about the same amount of money just in urgent relief. So I think while it's a shame that this isn't bipartisan right now, I believe the issues that we are going to fight for will be. So hopefully it's just something we needed to use for this urgent crisis.
And Senator, you are introducing the Reopen and Rebuild America's Schools Act, which would commit $130 billion in federal funding to public schools. Tell us what this proposal would do. And is this something you would also be willing to push through the reconciliation process if Republicans don't get on board?
So what the bill does is give resources to schools to upgrade their systems so they can have kids come back to school. So many schools don't have HVAC systems or air ventilation systems that can accommodate a safe classroom. They've been putting off repairs for too long, so you can't get clean air and be able to assure that people aren't going to spread COVID. So these resources would be used for that. They could also be used for telecommunications equipment. So to the extent some kids don't have access to tablets or internet or remote learning, that it would make that universally available and make sure that every school has access to Wi-Fi so that internet access becomes a basic human right for all of our students. So those are the kinds of things that bill can be used for, and it could easily be included in the first reconciliation package for COVID relief, since the whole point is to get schools open so parents can go back to work so we can get the economy moving again. And we should have safe schools. And to do that, you need testing, contact tracing, good facilities, the ability to spread kids out, and lots of masking, and eventually vaccinations.
But would you like to follow that up with legislation addressing the school system in general, sort of beyond COVID era?
Yeah, I think COVID really shone a light on the inequities in our education system. I mean, how many kids were left behind throughout New York because they didn't have access to the internet or a computer? Lots of kids in inner cities, lots of kids in rural areas. And we found that high-speed internet isn't available everywhere. How many kids had to do remote learning in a parking lot of a school or library because they didn't have internet at home? I mean, these are the real challenges. And so, yes, we should be focused on equity, investment in all communities for education, and we should be creating better facilities so in the next pandemic we are able to keep schools open.
Well, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And we want to take you now to the State Department, where President Joe Biden will soon deliver remarks outlining his administration's foreign policy. Right now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is introducing him. Let's listen in.
To address the climate crisis, to protect communities across our country. We need diplomacy to check the rise of authoritarianism, to prevent the spread of dangerous weapons, to shore up democracy, to defend human rights, all of which makes the world more stable and free, and all of which protects the security and prosperity of the American people. Foreign policy is domestic policy. And because our strength at home determines our strength in the world, domestic policy is foreign policy too. President Biden and Vice President Harris know this better than anyone. That's why they believe so strongly in the work that we do at the State Department. And they've made it clear that the first question we must ask ourselves here at State is, how will this benefit our fellow Americans? How will this policy answer their needs? How will this outreach reflect their values? How will this initiative make their lives just a little bit better? We're going to hold ourselves to that standard every step of the way. President Biden and Vice President Harris have come here today at the very start of their administration to make sure we know that we have their support. And that means a great deal to all of the men and women of the State Department. We will do our best, Mr. President, Madam Vice President, to make you proud. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Mr. Secretary, it's great to be here with you. And I've been looking forward a long time to be able to call you Mr. Secretary. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be back at the State Department under the eyes of the first American chief diplomat, Benjamin Franklin. And by the way, I want you all to know in the press, I was the Benjamin Franklin Professor of Presidential Politics at Penn. And I thought they did that because I was as old as he was, but I guess not. Anyway, all kidding aside, it's great to be here and stand alongside our most recent senior diplomat, Secretary Tony Blinken. Mr. Secretary, thank you for welcoming us today. We've worked together for over 20 years. Your diplomatic skills are respected equally by your friends and our competitors around the world. And they know when you speak for me. And so is the message I want the world to hear today. America is back. America is back. Diplomacy is back at the center of our foreign policy. As I said in my inaugural address, we will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's. American leadership must meet this new moment of advancing authoritarianism, including the growing ambitions of China to rival the United States and the determination of Russia to damage and disrupt our democracy. We must meet the new moment accelerating global challenges, from the pandemic to the climate crisis to nuclear proliferation, challenging the will only to be solved by nations working together and in common. We can't do it alone. We must start with diplomacy, rooted in America's most cherished democratic values, defending freedom, championing opportunity, upholding universal rights, respecting the rule of law, and treating every person with dignity. That's the grounding wire of our global policy, our global power. That's our inexhaustible source of strength. That's America's abiding advantage. Though many of these values have come under intense pressure in recent years, even pushed to the brink in the last few weeks, the American people are going to emerge from this moment stronger, more determined, and better equipped to unite the world in fighting to defend democracy, because we have fought for it ourselves. Over the past few days, we've been in close cooperation with our allies and partners to bring together the international community to address the military coup in Burma. I've also been in touch with Leader McConnell to discuss our shared concerns about the situation in Burma, and we are united in our resolve. There can be no doubt, in a democracy, force should never seek to overrule the will of the people or attempt to erase the outcome of a credible election. The Burmese military should relinquish power they have seized, release the advocates and activists and officials they have detained, lift the restrictions on telecommunications, and refrain from violence. As I said earlier this week, we will work with our partners to support restoration of democracy and the rule of law and impose consequences on those responsible. Over the past 2 weeks, I've spoken with the leaders of many of our closest friends: Canada, Mexico, the UK, Germany, France, NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, to reforming the habits of cooperation and rebuilding the muscle of democratic alliances that have atrophied over the past few years of neglect and, I would argue, abuse. America and alliances are our greatest asset. And leading with diplomacy means standing shoulder to shoulder with our allies and key partners once again. By leading with diplomacy, we must also mean engaging our adversaries and our competitors diplomatically, where it's in our interest, and advance the security of the American people. That's why yesterday the United States and Russia agreed to extend the New START treaty for 5 years to preserve the only remaining treaty between our countries safeguarding nuclear stability. At the same time, I made it clear to President Putin, in a manner very different from my predecessor, that the days of the United States rolling over in the face of Russia's aggressive actions, interfering with our elections, cyber attacks, poisoning its citizens, are over. We will not hesitate to raise the cost on Russia and defend our vital interest and our people. And we will be more effective in dealing with Russia when we work in coalition and coordination with other like-minded partners. The politically motivated jailing of Alexei Navalny and the Russian efforts to suppress freedom of expression and peaceful assembly are a matter of deep concern to us and the international community. Mr. Navalny, like all Russian citizens, is entitled to his rights under the Russian Constitution. He's been targeted for exposing corruption. He should be released immediately and without condition. We'll also take on directly the challenges posed by our prosperity, security, and democratic values by our most serious competitor, China. We'll confront China's economic abuses, counter its aggressive, coercive action to push back on China's attack on human rights, intellectual property, and global governance. But we are ready to work with Beijing when it's in America's interest to do so. We will compete from a position of strength by building back better at home, working with our allies and partners, renewing our role in international institutions, and reclaiming our credibility and moral authority, much of which has been lost. That's why we moved quickly to begin restoring American engagement internationally and earn back our leadership position, to catalyze global action on shared challenges. On day one, I signed the paperwork to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. We're taking steps led by the example of integrating climate objectives across all of our diplomacy and raising the ambition of our climate targets. That way we can challenge other nations, other major emitters, to up the ante on their own commitments. I'll be hosting a Climate Leaders Summit to address the climate crisis on Earth Day of this year. America must lead in the face of this existential threat. And just as with the pandemic, it requires global cooperation. We've also re-engaged with the World Health Organization. That way we can build better global preparedness to counter COVID-19, as well as detect and prevent future pandemics, because there will be more. We've elevated the status of cyber issues within our government, including appointing the first Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology. We're launching an urgent initiative to improve our capability, readiness, and resilience in cyberspace. Today, I'm announcing additional steps to course-correct our foreign policy and better unite our democratic values with our diplomatic leadership. To begin, Defense Secretary Austin will be leading a global posture review of our forces so that our military footprint is appropriately aligned with our foreign policy and national security priorities. It will be coordinated across all elements of our national security, with Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken working in close cooperation. And while this review is taking place, we'll be stopping any planned troop withdrawals from Germany. We're also stepping up our diplomacy to end the war in Yemen, a war which has created a humanitarian and strategic catastrophe. I've asked my Middle East team to ensure our support for the United Nations-led initiative to impose a ceasefire, open humanitarian challenge, and restore long-dormant peace talks. This morning, Secretary Blinken appointed Tim Lenderking, a career foreign policy officer, as our special envoy to the Yemen conflict, and I appreciate him doing this. Tim has lifelong experience in the region. and he'll work with the UN envoy and all parties to the conflict to push for a diplomatic resolution. And Tim's diplomacy will be bolstered by USAID working to ensure that humanitarian aid is reaching the Yemeni people who are suffering unendurable devastation. This war has to end. And to underscore our commitment, we are ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen, including relevant arms sales. At the same time, Saudi Arabia faces missile attacks, UAV strikes, and other threats from Iranian-supplied forces in multiple countries. We're going to continue to support and help Saudi Arabia defend its sovereignty and its territorial integrity and its people. We also face a crisis of more than 80 million displaced people suffering all around the world. The United States' moral leadership on refugee issues was a point of bipartisan consensus for so many decades when I first got here. We shine the lamp of liberty on oppressed people. We offered safe havens for those fleeing violence or persecution. And our example pushed other nations to open wide their doors as well. So today, I'm approving an executive order to begin the hard work of restoring our refugee admissions program to help meet the unprecedented global need. It's going to take time to rebuild what has been so badly damaged, but that's precisely what we're going to do. This executive order will position us to be able to raise the refugee admissions back up to 125,000 persons for the first full fiscal year of the Biden-Harris administration. And I'm directing the State Department to consult with Congress about making a down payment on that commitment as soon as possible. And to further repair our moral leadership, I'm also issuing a presidential memo to agencies to reinvigorate our leadership on the LGBTQI issues and do it internationally. You know, we'll ensure diplomacy and foreign assistance are working to promote the rights of those individuals, included by combating criminalization and protecting the LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers. And finally, to successfully reassert our diplomacy and keep Americans safe, prosperous, and free, we must restore the health and morale of our foreign policy institutions. I want the people who work in this building and our embassies and consulates around the world to know I value your expertise and I respect you, and I will have your back. This administration is going to empower you to do your jobs, not target or politicize you. We want a rigorous debate that brings all perspectives and makes room for dissent. That's how we'll get the best possible policy outcomes. So with your help, the United States will again lead, not just by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. That's why my administration has already taken the important step to live our domestic values at home, our democratic values at home. Within hours of taking office, I signed an executive order overturning the hateful, discriminatory Muslim ban, reversed the ban on transgender individuals serving in our military. As part of our commitment to truth, transparency, and accountability, we stated on day one, we started in day one with daily briefings of the press from the White House. We've reinstituted regular briefings here at State and at the Pentagon. We believe a free press isn't an adversary. Rather, it's essential. A free press is essential to the health of a democracy. We've restored our commitment to science and to create policies grounded in facts and evidence. I suspect Ben Franklin would approve. We've taken steps to acknowledge and address systemic racism and the scourge of white supremacy in our own country. Racial equity will not just be an issue for one department in our administration. It has to be the business of the whole of government and all our federal policies and institutions. All this matters to foreign policy because when we host the Summit of Democracies early in my administration, to rally the nations of the world to defend democracy globally, to push back the authoritarianism as advanced, we'll be a much more credible partner because of these efforts to shore up our own foundations. There's no longer a bright line between foreign and domestic policy. Every action we take in our conduct abroad, we must take with American working families in mind. Advancing a foreign policy for the middle class demands urgent focus on our domestic economic renewal. And that's why I immediately put forth the American Rescue Plan to pull us out of this economic crisis. That's why I signed an executive order strengthening our Buy American policies last week. And that's also why I work with Congress to make far-reaching investments in research and development of transformational technologies. These investments are going to create jobs, maintain America's competitive edge globally, and ensure all Americans share in the dividends. If we invest in ourselves and our people, if we fight to ensure that American businesses are positioned to compete and win on the global stage, if the rules of international trade aren't stacked against us, if our workers and intellectual property are protected, then there's no country on earth, not China or any other country on earth, that can match us. Investing in our diplomacy isn't something we do just because it's the right thing to do for the world. We do it in order to live in peace, security, and prosperity. We do it because it's in our own naked self-interest. When we strengthen our alliances, we amplify our power, as well as our ability to disrupt threats before they can reach our shores. When we invest in economic development of countries, we create new markets for our products and reduce the likelihood of instability, violence, and mass migrations. When we strengthen health systems in far regions of the world, we reduce the risk of future pandemics that could threaten our people and our economy. When we defend equal rights of people the world over, of women and girls, LGBTQ individuals, indigenous communities, and people with disabilities, the people of every ethnic background and religion, we also ensure that those rights are protected for our own children here in America. America cannot afford to be absent any longer on the world stage. I come today to the State Department, an agency as old and as storied as the nation itself, because diplomacy has always been essential to how America writes its own destiny. For the diplomacy of Ben Franklin helped assure the success of our revolution. The vision of the Marshall Plan helped prevent the world from foundering on the wreckage of war. And the passions of Eleanor Roosevelt declared the audacious idea of universal rights that belong to all. The leadership of diplomats of every stripe doing the daily work of engagement created the very idea of a free and interconnected world. We are a country that does big things. American diplomacy makes it happen, and our administration is ready to take up the mantle and lead once again. Thank you all. May God bless you and protect our troops, our diplomats, and our development experts, and all Americans serving in harm's way. Going this way. Thank you all.
And we've been listening to President Joe Biden speak at the State Department. The president is vowing to renew cooperation with allies and reverse the America First policy of the Trump administration. He also discussed the importance of engaging adversaries from a position of strength and moral authority. And the president vowed to work closely with the State Department to allow diplomats to do their jobs and to value their opinions. Let's bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe for more. Hi, Ed. The president's message there, quote, that diplomacy is back, America is back, is a direct repudiation of the Trump administration, even of the slogan, Make America Great Again, right? So how much of what we just heard President Biden just say was simply to make clear how distinct his approach to foreign policy will be?
Oh, the whole thing was designed to do that, Tanya. The mere fact that he was at the State Department at all today is mostly a symbolic gesture designed to impress two groups of people. One, the State Department workforce here in Washington and around the world that in many ways has been beleaguered by the last 4 years and the previous occupant of the White House. And then two, the rest of the world was the other audience, to signal that he takes diplomacy seriously, so much so that he would go visit